Okay, so I'm going to explain my handout to you a little bit, and then we'll pray and get started. So you should have a handout. If you don't, there's more up here. I'll grab you one. It's two stapled together pages. On the very, very back, you'll have a page that goes the other way. We're going to talk about, and you can see on purpose I haven't told you where the passages are from. We're going to talk about that. So it's just A, B, C, and D on top. The answer is on page 3, but don't look. Right. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight that for you. So let's pray and we'll get going. The prayer is one I've used in here before. It's from the Episcopal Church. They don't call themselves Episcopal. The Anglican Church in New Zealand, from their prayer book, and they've given kind of this expanded form of the Lord's Prayer. One of the reasons why I want to pray it is next week we're going to talk about both interpretation and translation. So one, how do we translate the Bible from one language to the other? What's the thought process there? And then what's the role of interpretation, understanding it, right? And you can see what this is. This is, in a certain sense, this is someone's attempt to expand on and interpret the Lord's Prayer for a more modern setting. So it's just a way to get our thinking hats started there for next week. So please pray with me. Eternal Spirit, Earth Maker, Pain Bearer, Life Giver, Source of all that is and shall be, Father and Mother of us all, loving God in whom is heaven. May the hallowing of your name echo through the universe. May the way of your justice be followed by peoples of the world. May your heavenly will be done by all created beings. May your commonwealth of peace and freedom sustain our hope and come on earth. With the bread we need for today, feed us. In the hearts we observe from one another, forgive us. From trials too great to endure, spare us. From the grip of all that is evil, free us. For you reign in the glory of the power that is love, now and forever. Amen. Okay, so we're going to spend most of today talking about a genre, just to think of how we would think about different books of the Bible, or even different parts of the Bible. I'm going to talk to you for a little bit and tell a few stories, and then we're going to actually be much more interactive and look at passages and think about passages, right? So I got two little quick stories that will get us into thinking about this. So here's my first one. We moved here in the summer of 2019. Our youngest son, Jensen, had just finished kindergarten. He's now in 7th grade. It's crazy to me. But I have this distinct memory of him coming home one day. This was before COVID, from Melanie Verdine's first grade class, and he was absolutely thrilled that he had learned something, and he wanted to explain it to me. He had learned the difference between fiction and non-fiction. And first grade, he had the idea down. He went and got a stack of books out of his room. Right? He had these, at the time he was reading books called Captain Underpants, Elephant and Piggy, there were all these fiction series, right? And then he also had all these National Geographic books on there was a book on elephants, a book on lizards, a book on the solar system, right? And he was going through and saying, this is fiction, this is non-fiction. Pretty soon he was giving me a test. He wanted to make sure I understood, right? What's in the fiction category and what's in the non-fiction category, right? So this is a category distinction that we all know, right? We go to the library to get a book, and we know there's a fiction section and there's a non-fiction section, right? Basic distinction, right? But of course, categories or genres of literature are much more diverse than just fiction and non-fiction. There's a lot more going on, right? So, story 2. First teaching job I ever had, right out of grad school, was at a large liberal arts regional college outside of St. Louis. And I had to teach this class called World Religions. The students didn't want to be in it. It was a gen ed class. They had to take it, half of them were business majors, right? But they had to take a class in either religion or philosophy, and they all thought religion would be easy because they were religious. They learned really quick that they'd made a mistake. They should have taken philosophy, right? But what they would read in the class, what I assigned to them was we had a big, overly expensive textbook, right? Published by some big press, right? Had chapters on how do you study religion? What is religion? And then there'd be a chapter on Hinduism and on Buddhism and all these things, right? So they had this big textbook, and then they had to read what we call in professor speak primary texts, right? So if you're going to study Judaism, what's your primary text? The Old Testament or the Torah, right? We can talk about what we're going to call. How about Christianity? Well, the New Testament and the Old, right? We would talk about both, and we talk about how Judaism and Christianity are related. We do Islam, of course, it'd be the Quran, right? So my students, when they would look at those texts, because most of them were Christian, they wouldn't put it in the fiction category. They'd say it's non-fiction, even the Quran. But I noticed a few weeks in, the first time I was teaching this class, and it kept happening other years, that when we read books for the Eastern religions, so the Bhagavad Gita for Hinduism, some Buddhist texts for Buddhism, Confucius' Analects, right, these Eastern religious texts, that a couple of them, and this was the first time they ever had to write like a paper that was more than 3 pages long, right, they would refer to these texts as novels. Right? And they were wrong, and I would correct them, but I began over time to understand why they were doing this. They were still working with this basic distinction of fiction and non-fiction. And if you've ever read some of these Eastern religious texts, they sound like mythology, right? There's gods that can fly, and they show up here or there, and they destroy their enemies, and they're involved with wars, and they're getting people pregnant, and there's baby gods, right? There's all kinds of things happening, right? It sounds like a myth. So it's not true, therefore belongs in the fiction category. So that's how they would assign them. And I had to realize I have to teach them there are other categories here, right? So think about when you go into the library. Let's say, I can never say the name right. Laudit Library, right? I mean, even the fiction section. Think about what are the different fiction sections.
Romance,
right, so you get romance, westerns, science fiction and fantasy, right, mysteries, right. These are the ones that aren't so highbrow, right. And then you get this other section of literature, we might call it, right. But how about, what if you wanted to read, Dostoevsky? Where would it actually be in the library? Well, it could end up in the sort of general literature section, but actually if you go to Laudit, it's in a different section. They've got this classical literature, right? How about if you want to read Shakespeare?
It's usually
Drama or plays, which are always put into the non-fiction category. I don't know why, but plays are classified as non-fiction. So is poetry. Because we realize there's something going on here more than just telling us a story. So I think even with fiction, right, we put these in the categories, right? The romance novel is a cheap entertainment. When I read Dostoevsky or Dickens or somebody like that, I'm expecting to get more out of it, right? We can actually use fiction to help us think about moral issues and these kinds of things, right? So even right there, right, we've got kind of this in-between category, actually a couple of them, right? And then think about non-fiction. I've actually given you a list on the handout, which doesn't even cover probably half, but think of all the categories you could put things in. And things I don't have on here are things that cookbooks, and all the other kinds of things you go find in the there's all these different categories, right? So again, think about that. If we go back to the library too, there's also a section over there of Christian fiction. It's called inspirational usually, right? And again, the idea is, yes, you're reading a story, but it's doing something else. It's encouraging you in your faith. Somehow it's moral or holy, right? I mean, I just want to point this out. We have all kinds of categories and they overlap, right? So I hope the place where I'm going is obvious. The Bible works this way. It's got all these different genres in it, right? And our problem often is we pick up a biblical text and we think the whole thing goes in one category. And so we read it and interpret it as if it's all in the same category. And we tend to put it in things like a law, or God's given us instruction, right? But what if parts of it are actually supposed to make us think rather than give us an answer? So just real obvious example. Think about some of Jesus' parables. Is the point of the parable that you get the right interpretation of it at the end, like Aesop's fables, right? There's a meaning here, like, the rabbit and the tortoise, right? And then in the race, the lesson is don't get cocky, right? Is that how Jesus parable? And we can actually argue, like, what's the meaning of the fable, right? We do the same thing with parables. That's the point. The point isn't there's one takeaway answer. It's you should let this story get stuck in your head and keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And it should actually get you to think about what's right and what's wrong, and how should I act in this situation, and what if the circumstances are different, right? There isn't just one meaning for one place and all the time, right? So I think it's just worth thinking that this is how the Bible works too, right? If you look on my handout, if you turn to that third page, I'm going to ask you as best as you can not to look at the footnote on the bottom, right? I know it's hard, right?
Just fold the page.
So this whole third page looks like this. This is just I pulled out a long quote from a book. I'm not going to read the whole thing. The author's name is Rowan Williams. He was, I think, until 2008, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's the Episcopalian Pope, basically, or was for a period of time, right? But he is in this. This is from a book he wrote where he's talking about how to read the Bible. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can take it away. But he's saying things like here at the beginning: the Bible is the territory in which Christians expect to hear God speaking. That's what the church says about the Bible. The Bible itself declares that in it God communicates what he wants to tell us, right? But he goes on to say this is a pretty complicated claim. Pick up a Bible, open it at random, and it's not very likely that the first thing you will hit upon is a statement from God to you in a simple sense. You may hit upon a psalm, right? Most psalms are human beings talking to God. It's music. It's like us singing a hymn, right? God's not talking to us. We're talking to God, right? Now God, I think, talks back not audibly but in our heads when we read this psalm and think about it, right? But it's us talking, right? You may hit upon a piece of history. You may hit on one of those long portions of names. I mean, if the Bible is God's word to us, what is the point of all these lists of names? How am I being spiritually uplifted? Right? He gives us a statement here. Unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad beget Mahujael, and Mahujael beget Methuselah, right? I mean, what do we do with that, right? So think of all the different, if you just randomly open the Bible, the passages, what would you get? And they're pretty random and different, right? So that second paragraph, here is a collection of books and includes, among other things, codes of law, collections of proverbial wisdom, hymn books, poetry, chronicles, letters, polemical texts, visionary records. We could go on and on and on, right? Then he says, the diversity of the Bible is as great as if you had within the same two covers, for example, Shakespeare's sonnets, the law reports of 1910, the introduction to Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, the letters of St. Anselm, and a fragment of the Canterbury Tales. All within the same 2 covers. Yeah. Right? And we're supposed to figure out how it all goes together. Right? This is my point. Right? Well, you could keep reading here, but I'm trying to make this point of the Bible is weird. And that's part of it, right? And it's got all kinds of interesting stuff in it, right? But think about if you went to the library and checked out a book in each of these categories, right? You might sit down in the evening and pick up that book of poetry and read it and think about it. If you do that with your cookbooks, I'm going to think you're a bit odd. Right? I mean, we use this literature in different ways. We expect different things of it, and when we come to it, we're doing different things with it, right? Again, sometimes we treat the Bible as if everything in it is in the same category, and that's often where we get screwed up and misunderstand it, right? We miss some things, right? So my exercise for us is to, think about some of these genres. So on that very back page, I've got those 4 passages. I want us to try to put them in a category, and then we'll look at some other ones with the Bibles that we have, right? So if you've got this page where it's on the side, I'm not going to read all of the passages just for the sake of time. We've only got half an hour left, but some of these will be texts that you're aware of, some of them, or that you're familiar with, others you won't so much. So,
I can do A very easily.
Okay.
Godspell.
What? From Godspell. Right. Well, let's think about this one, right? So you've heard this. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, there we wept when we remembered Zion. Right? Could be Godspell, could be reggae music, right? But it's obviously a psalm, right? So
it's an anthem.
It's an anthem. It's right. Actually, right. We've got actually two parts. There's verses 4 through 6 are probably like some kind of a stanza, right? There's a shift, right? Let's go down to the end of it. So this is a psalm. At the beginning of it, you all know. I picked it on purpose. I bet you don't know the ending of this psalm so well. Anybody want to read verses 8 and 9? O daughter Babylon, you devastator, happy will be they who pay you back for what you have done to us. Happy shall be they who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. It's actually a mild form. It actually says, smash their heads open on the rock. Right?
But it's happened.
Well, I mean, these things have happened in world history, absolutely. But here are God's people saying, we've been brought into exile. The people who have conquered us are making us sing our music for them. We're so angry at them that we hope that we get to kill them and kill their kids like they did to us. We don't want that in the Bible. Right? We don't want it there. Right? This is an especially problematic passage if you think God is talking to you and telling you to go do something. Right? So I'm going to ask you the obvious question, right? I said it's a psalm. It's actually Psalm 137, right? What genre would you put it in?
Almost a lament.
Well, a lament, right? So it's obviously some kind of lament, right?
History.
What's that? History. I mean, there's some history here. They're talking about real things that happened, right? Israel was brought into exile. So how would Israel have used this text? What did they do with it?
Energized them when they finally went back.
Yeah, that's obviously that's part of it, right? But I mean, well, I'm going to get really basic. Like, what are the Psalms for? How did Israel use them?
There's 6 different sections of it.
Singing.
They sung them, right? So the primary thing happening here is this is a hymn book, right? or poetry, right? And sometimes we need texts that allow us to express how angry we are. It doesn't mean we should go do it, right? But it does mean, hey, terrible things are happening. These people are really bad. I wish they would die.
In such a horrible way.
It is a horrible way, but I mean, this is, some of the issues here is this is what happened to Israel.
And if we can express it, perhaps we don't have to do it.
That's the thing, right? The other thing could be if we can express this and talk about it and actually say, this is how angry I am. I am so angry that I would like to take these people who hurt me and I like to hurt them back, right? To give words to that is an important thing. It doesn't mean you should go do it. You should actually act on it.
It's a call for justice, though.
Yeah, I mean, and it is a call for justice. I mean, there's an expression here of these terrible things that have happened to us, right? There is a place where it would be just to do this back, right? There are other things we think God might tell us where he says, well, yes, but the vengeance is mine, he says. Not yours, right?
And if you can say it together, then you're not alone.
Right, and it's
Support.
to be able to express this with people. I mean, this was actually probably a hymn sung in worship, right? I mean, so I don't, well, the way that the things are in the world right now, maybe we don't have to be that imaginative, but like think, I mean, what if our country got conquered, right? And, you know, all these terrible things happened, right? At some point, we might write things like this and talk about them and come to a church and actually say, these terrible things have happened. We've been deeply injured. Our children have been killed. Our parents have been. All of these awful things have happened. Let's express this. Let's lament and mourn, and then think about how do we move on without becoming the same kind of people that the people who did this to us are.
I was going to say, it's sort of like what the Jews were doing in memory of World War II.
Yep. Right, I mean, so again, this is one way to think about this text, right? But if you put it all in the same category of God is telling you to do something, you're going to do some bad things. And I'd argue that isn't what God is telling us in this text. But notice where I'm already interpreting. Well, I'm already saying this is what I think the text means, right? How am I doing that? I'm saying, well, what genre is this in? And I would also ask things like, who wrote it? Who were the human beings who wrote it down? When? Where were they? What was going on in their lives?
Context.
Right? Context, right? So I always use this, it's a silly example with my seminary students. I tell them, if today a volcano happened at my house, and my house was covered in lava, right, which is covered in, it was pre-preserved, and 1,000 years from now, archaeologists come dig it out. In the corner of my basement, they're going to find 2 boxes. One box is full of every Lego instruction my kids have ever had. And the other one is full of every kind of instruction manual for anything we've ever bought. Like it's got the air fryer instruction, the coffee maker, right? All those kinds of things, right? Furniture directions, right? Now, if the archaeologists who dig this up don't know what it is, they're going to try to figure it out. And what if they put it into the category of, well, this 21st century American was very interested in this pictorial poetry. Right? They would have made a mistake. They would have put the text in the wrong genre. Right? And they're going to have all kinds of theories. Eventually, a scholar would correct them and say, no, these are instruction manuals. And they have pictures rather than words so that people who speak different languages can use them. Right? My point is, what if we do that with the Bible sometimes? What if we've just gotten it completely wrong? We put it into the wrong category, right? And often that's what we do. If we think God is speaking to us here, we think everything in it is God telling us what we ought to be doing, right? So this isn't on the handout. One big passage we could think about this is to me one of the most problematic things of the Bible, the Old Testament in particular, is Israel's conquest of Canaan. Because it's basically an ethnic cleansing. right? If God told Israel to do this, I have a bone to pick with God. To me, it doesn't fit God's category, right? So how might we read all of that? Did God really tell Israel this is what he wanted them to do? Or are there other ways to think about what's happening here? I mean, at least one thing that's happening is Israel is looking back on their own history and telling a story. Right? So think about the way we tell American history, right? We're actually having all kinds of cultural battles about this right now. Should we teach our high schoolers that when we came over here, we slaughtered 90% of the natives?
Yes.
Well, we all saying yes, but lots of people say we shouldn't because it might make them feel bad. They won't think America's great. Right? My point is, like, part of the Bible, that's how they're actually operating. Israel's telling its own story. Right? And God is still speaking to you and me through this, right? But it doesn't mean he's telling us, well, you should go conquer lands in my name and kill all the people who won't convert, which is how those passages were understood when the Europeans were conquering the rest of the world. I'll get there in just a second, right? That's how they actually used them. We're God's people. Just like God gave Israel Canaan, God's given us a new world. Right? And I'd actually argue that actually what we ought to have gotten out of all those passages is like, don't do this. Bad things happen. This is not God's will. Right? Like there are different ways to sort of but this is what we do with it. And again, part of this is what we were saying last week, especially if you've grown up in the church, you've just been surrounded by ways to interpret this text that seem normal. This is the way everybody else reads it, right? But what if they're wrong? Right? So this is part of the point of, it's not that we're going to get rid of the Bible. This is where we think God is speaking to us, but we can constantly reevaluate what it means and how to interpret it. And one of the ways to do that is to say, what category is this even in? Right? Really quick, someone who's got a Bible, I want to find the right passage here, right? Open it up to Proverbs chapter 26. Yes, then Betty, while they're doing that, ask your a question.
Well, it seems to me that you could just, passage like that last one, why is it even there? It shouldn't even be there. And was it Thomas Jefferson that redid the...
So he just did that with the New Testament. What he did was take out all the miracles.
Yeah, well, I mean...
Because it's just...
there's so much. We should just read what we know well.
Well, but the point I'm trying to get us to see is, right, our first instinct is to say, why is this even in here? Yeah. Let's get rid of it.
Right.
And I want to say is before we get rid of it, because that would be a big thing, and we'd be in conflict with all kinds of other Christians, is to say, what is actually the point of this? I don't think God is giving us instructions to go do this, but He is. I mean, if you read through the Psalms, almost a third of them are Psalms of lament. Something terrible has happened, and the psalmist is saying, God, why aren't you doing something? Why aren't you intervening, right? Why are you allowing our enemies to do these terrible things, right? So we need to be able to corporately acknowledge that awful things are happening, right? And if you do have these feelings of, I'm just going to get real sort of like contemporary. If I was an undocumented person living in Minneapolis right now, you better believe I would be thinking in my head, I hope these ICE agents die. Now, I don't think you should go kill them.
No.
Right? But you might want them to die. You need to be able to acknowledge that rather than keeping it in. Yeah. That's what this psalm is doing. It is allowing Israel in exile to say, we have all these terrible things in our heads. We are angry, we are hurting, we need to be honest with ourselves. That's the case.
Trouble is, there are so many crazy people out there who read this and say, oh, this is what I'm going
Right.
to do then to
Right.
something I don't like.
Yes, exactly.
Choose.
And they think that God is somehow
Yeah.
authorizing it, right? And again,
Been used
so
in support of any-
well, and this is one of the other big things we want to say is like you can't just grab a Bible passage and pull it out of the Bible and say, I'm going to do this, when there are all kinds of other things in there that are saying, well, actually, you shouldn't just go kill this person you're angry at. It's okay to feel that way. You're a human being. Somebody hurts you, like somebody kills my spouse. In my head at least, I'm going to be, I wish they were dead. Right? I hope I would become the person who can forgive them in some way. Right, Bob?
Yeah, even in our own life, we interpret our own history, right?
Absolutely.
And so the Bible is full of interpreted history from a certain viewpoint.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, if Michigan State happens to be Michigan in football, well, it's obvious that God was on Michigan's
Right.
side, right? But this last passage, the Bible is as much about human nature
Yep.
and how our human nature interacts with God and vice versa. So, these war stories and stuff really should instill in us questions like you just said, was God really on their
Yep.
side? And when we think about that, we have to come and conclude, no, that was their human interpretation of their own history.
Right.
And so I'm dealing with this now where I volunteer, where kind of fundamentalist evangelicals have now taken over the program. And so I have to be very careful in how, because they would absolutely interpret that, as if God spoke that,
Yep.
to whoever wrote that down. And so we need to be careful as human beings not to subject and allow our human nature to allow us to interpret God in a manner that God never meant, for us to think.
Yeah, but and I think all that's right. But the other thing I would highlight is God is also telling us you are a human being who has a human nature. It's okay to feel this way. Don't act it out. Right? God's got other things to tell us about how we should actually do this, right? And so this is again part of my point is, right, we tend to approach the Bible and say God is telling us to go do something. And what if he isn't in certain passages telling us to go do something? He's saying, hey, take a deep breath, feel all that anger. Go talk to somebody else about it. They're angry too. Let it out. If you got to go punch a wall, go punch a wall. Right?
And often we get rid of those feelings by singing.
Yep.
And with songs, and that's why some of the songs that were so popular in the 60s.
Right.
And even now, there are some songwriters beginning to create songs, express feelings.
So that's a very good comparison. So I mean, one way you could read this psalm is this is a protest psalm. Right.
Is a form, what degree?
Right, but I'm gonna we should move on from this. But that's my point of, right. This isn't God giving us an instruction. I would argue that's not what's going on here. Dale, you had your hand up.
Well, I'm just returning to the notion of genre. In my field, we deal with genre a lot. We did when I was paying attention to it. And one of the ways they define genre is that it's situated, and it gives people a way of trying to do something through language. So genre are like tools that you can use within a situation. Here I am in my situation. I want to either persuade someone or express something I'm feeling or whatever. So it's a situated action. It's some sort of situated action through language. And so you always deal with this, or I've heard you do it several times. And the time when you did it that most stuck in my mind was when we looked at Ruth. And I had never thought before, Ruth is written not in the time of the judges, but is written in the time of the exile, or the coming back from exile, to say that not everybody has to be pure Jewish to be holy. And so that's that whole notion of seeing Ruth as situated action by someone who is arguing against people like, who are they?
The Moabites. Moabites,
And Ezra, who were very busy excluding non-Jewish people. And here, the Moabitish woman is included.
So again, that's exactly what's happening. Ruth isn't written, I mean, it's a set in like the 12th century or 11th century BC, before King David. It's probably written down 500 to 600 years afterwards. So think about how we probably wouldn't, we don't do it so much with literature anymore, but we do it with movies all the time. We set it back in this earlier age. I mean, real obvious example, Mel Gibson, Braveheart, right? Braveheart really isn't about Scottish independence.
Well, some might think.
But I would argue about what's really going on in that movie is he's using the story of Scottish independence to talk about our personal independence. Right? That happens all the time, right? Ruth is doing a thing like that, right? We use history to talk about the now, right? That's what genres do. Another easy one on this is, we don't know what to do with a book like Revelation because it's a genre we don't use anymore. It's called apocalyptic, right? And you tell these stories, and there's all this symbolism, but you're actually talking about contemporary events. Like they're actually talking about the fact that they're being persecuted. They aren't talking about, in 2,000 years, God is going to come and destroy the world and snatch people away and do all these crazy things, right? But because we don't know what a genre it's in, we were like, well, I don't know where to put this. I'm going to put it in this category of God's talking about the future and what's going to happen at the end. It's a mistake. Right? Did someone look up that proverb? This is what I always say. Proverbs 26 verses 4 and 5. When people get into things like in errancy, this is one of the verses I point them to. So someone want to read the two?
26, 4 and 5.
Yep.
Do not answer fools according to their folly, or you will be a fool yourself. Answer fools according to their folly, or they will be wise in their own eyes.
So which one? Do you answer the fool or do you not?
Yeah, really.
Well, so what category do you put Proverbs in? Wisdom literature, right? The whole point is, it isn't giving you the answer. It's not telling you what to go do. It's saying, hey, you're going to encounter a foolish people. You need to discern the best way to act in the particular situation that you're in. Sometimes you should respond to them. Sometimes you shouldn't. A wise person knows when to respond and when not to. That's what it's actually saying. It isn't saying, do this every time, or do this every time you're in this situation. It's saying, no, you should take a step back and think about it. Right? And actually figure out what's the best thing to do here. And the whole book of Proverbs, by the way, it's written to, it tells us that the very beginning. A wise person is writing to a young man who wants to seek wisdom, and the whole book is it's building on this, right? So you get to the end. I bet there's a bunch of women in here who have been told things about being a Proverbs 31 woman, right? You know, she goes into the markets and she raises all this, makes all this money and sells things, and her husband's proud of her, and you know. Hint, hint, it's not talking about a real person. The Proverbs 31 woman is a wisdom. It's actually ending the book by saying, here's what wisdom looks like. Right?
It's impossible to be that perfect.
Right. but I mean, and, so the idea here is it's wisdom. So the Jews interpret it this way to say there's wisdom, which is part of God's being, which is in the world, and we should try to be in correspondence with that wisdom. This is how God is speaking to us, right? Christian authors, when they're doing a job of reading this, realize that wisdom is the Holy Spirit. So this isn't actually saying, hey, women, go do really well and make your husbands proud. It's actually talking about wisdom and what following wisdom looks like, doing it in an idiom that a person in like the 6th to 8th century BC would have understood, but which we need some help to see what's really going on. Joe.
When I read Proverbs, I call it pithy.
Right, yeah.
Or stuff you seal, bumper sticker.
Yeah. But I think, this is the thing, I think it oftentimes gets used that way, right? People just say, I got this little quip, God's telling me what to do, and he isn't giving you a command to say, do this when you're in this spot. It's, think about this, right? If you've got a person who's just utterly foolish, who believes obvious nonsense, and they're arguing with you, right? I mean, those two verses. Most of the time, you shouldn't argue with somebody on the internet. But every now and then, maybe it's okay. Maybe there are times when it is the right thing to do. But most of the time, no. Right? This isn't going to help anybody. You're just going to get more angry, and they're going to get more angry, and nothing's going to happen. Right? Right.
I think it's interesting, too, that in most cultures, especially the ancient Western cultures, wisdom is always feminine.
Yeah.
Could we extend the woman in Proverbs 31? You say Christians interpret that as
Holy Spirit, yeah.
and we interpret it as the church. That is in the same way as Ephesians 5 that was talking about husband-wife relationship. That would say, I'm talking about Christ
in the church, right? So, again, what is Jesus? I mean, it's Paul, but Paul's talking about Jesus in the church. He uses this a metaphor to say husbands should take care of their wives. They should love them as they love their own bodies and be willing to die for them, right? And then it says wives should submit to their husbands and respect them and all these things. And again, we've read this as like there's the head of the household and men should dominate and all these sorts of things. But Paul even tells us, I'm not talking about marriage, I'm talking about Christ and the church. He's using a cultural understanding from his time in which men were the head of the household, saying this is something you all are aware of. You know how this works. This is how our culture operates, for better or for worse. He's not endorsing it. He's just saying this is the reality. He goes, it's actually a really helpful analogy to think about how we as people in the church should relate to God, right? Jesus takes care of the church. How much so? He's willing to die for it. Right? But it isn't actually telling us how husbands and wives should be related always and everywhere at all times. He's taking an example out of his culture, saying, I'm going to use this in my culture to talk about Christ and the church. We have to figure that out and say, this isn't telling us how men and women should relate. It's using patriarchy to say, well, patriarchy perhaps shouldn't exist amongst people, but it's actually a helpful way to think about God in the church, because God is the head, and we aren't. But that shouldn't happen in human relations, right? But that's a really sophisticated, careful interpretation that you can't argue with someone on Facebook. Because you need a back and forth. You need to explain things. You have to sit down and do it, right? And again, what's easy is to have these quips. We can put them on a bumper, a sticker, right? Yeah.
The aha I'm having this morning is that the difficulty of knowing when
read Scripture alone and to read it with other good people.
That's,
Because I can read it and be very not inspired at all.
Yep.
But I can read it where there's a dynamic of people I disagree with. It's a dynamic that leaves me of saying, wow, I have to be open to what might happen.
Okay. Well, so on that note, I would say one, I mean, there's definitely a place for us to read the Bible on our own. Like, I think you ought to do that. I would encourage you all to do it. What I always like to tell students is, but when you read it on your own, you are reading it because you are trying to say, what is God saying to me? And that's different from when I read it in a community, right? You don't get to make doctrinal or moral decisions when you read it on your own. That's how a church reads the Bible, as a community. We come together, we debate, we argue, we try to figure out what it means, and we say, this is what we think it means right now. Right? That's different from, again, reading it on our own, right? And again, it's worth pointing out, for most of church history, most people couldn't read. Having a whole Bible available to you would have been a very expensive thing, right? You heard it. You heard it.
Written in like Latin.
Right. You heard it read. You heard it explained to you by a preacher. Right? The idea that you would take it home on your own, right, and try to determine this for yourself, like, it's a good thing that we can, but we don't want to lose the fact that it's supposed to be a community book, not an individual book, right? Real quick, let's look at some of these other texts. So just let's put them in a category. So B is, I'll just tell you, it's a parable, right? It's one of Jesus' parables. It's a parable of Lazarus and the rich man. So it's a parable. But again, what category do you put a parable in? If this was a standalone book and you wanted to go find it in the library, where would you go?
Well, fiction, except I didn't used to think so.
Right.
When I first started reading it, I thought this was a historical report. But then eventually someone persuaded me to read it as a parable, fiction parable.
But again, this is the point, right? So let's say this isn't telling us things that really happened, that there really wasn't a person named Lazarus and there wasn't a rich man. Jesus is telling us a story to make a point, right? Does that mean it's a fiction? Right? It's actually kind of hard to think about, like, right? I mean, where does a parable belong? Yes, it's not literally true, right? But it's trying to communicate something to us that is.
Creative nonfiction.
I mean, we could put it in some, but in a certain sense it is fiction, and that it's a story, right? Just like the tale of like I mentioned the hare and the tortoise, right? As far as I know, tortoise and hares don't talk to each other and have races, right?
So it's all fantasy.
Right, but it's telling us something that's actually true. It's like giving us a moral to think about, right? That's how parables work, right? They're even more so sophisticated. A C, what's a C? A letter. Right. So here's again the thing that's worth pointing out. Most of the New Testament is letters, and they're real letters. One person wrote a letter to another person, or a group of people, right? So again, imagine if, like, let's say you've saved a bunch of letters from a person that was important to you, and then someone else finds them and starts reading them, but they don't know who they're from. Are they going to understand everything that's going on in these letters? Probably going to go like, I wonder what was happening here. What are they arguing about here? Right? Or what's going on here that they're having to talk about this third person, right? We need to figure out what they were talking about, right? And this is actually hard, right? So Paul's written a letter to the church in Galatia. Let's look at what he says, right? He's got a standard greeting. We can tell this is a letter from the first century. He tells us who he is, tells us something about himself, tells us who it's going to. He gives them this kind of standard greeting, grace to you and peace, right? And then says, I'm astonished that you're so quickly deserting, and he just lays into them. I mean, he's downright mean. He's mad at them, right? But we got to figure out why. We got to figure out why he's mad. What's he mad about? We got to read the whole thing, and then we got to kind of figure out what's happening in the context, right? Otherwise, we're not going to get the argument, right? And so again, we got Paul there writing this letter. If you read other things he wrote, let's say the Thessalonians or the Ephesians or the Romans, right? He's got a whole different tone, right? Because he's not arguing with them about the same kind of a thing. He's encouraging them. He's happy with this group over here, right? And the danger is sometimes we just pick out verses from each of these letters and say, this is what Paul thinks. And I want to go, well, are you sure? This is what he's saying in the year 50 to this group over here, but maybe 10 years down the road, in 60 AD, he's working with different people. Maybe he says, well, actually, we should handle this in a different way, and maybe he's changed his mind. If you haven't changed your mind in 10 years, there's something wrong with you, right? You should be learning, right? Right. A D really fast, right? This is the story of Jephthah, who goes and wins a battle, and he says, God, I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my house to thank you for having to win this battle. And what's the first thing that comes out of his house? His daughter. And it makes it sound like he does actually kill her as a sacrifice, right? Is this history? Is this a parable? Is it a myth? We could spend a long time arguing, right? But one of my points is that it actually isn't easy to figure out what to do with it, right? We tend to default to this as a story telling us something that really happened. I'm not so certain that is, right? It could be in the same kind of a category as something like George Washington and the cherry tree, right? Which probably didn't happen, but it actually does have a lesson to teach us, right? So you can see in the rest of this handout, we're up for time, but I've given you kind of the 6 basic categories of biblical text, right? And you need to think about what I'm reading, what does it go in, right? And 2, notice a book doesn't always fit in one category, right? If you read Exodus, it's mostly a historical narrative, but if you get to chapter 15, the whole thing is poetry, right? If you read Luke, the Gospel of Luke, think about chapter 2, or chapter 1, right? Mary sings, right? It's not history at this point, it's poetry, right? And we need to pay attention to those things, right? Rather than sort of saying all of this is like God is telling me what I should be doing right now, right? It's actually God wants you to read it and think about it, and meditate on it.
I guess a simple way for me to think about it is the Bible's written for me, but not necessarily to me.
Well, that's often the case, especially with the letters, right? Of when God has said, I want you right now living in Grand Haven in 2026, I want you to read what Paul wrote to the Romans, because it's good for you to hear it.
You should obey civil authority.
It's well. But again, that's what we need to do is what is Paul actually talking about? I mean, this is the thing worth asking, where is he when he wrote that? He's probably in a prison cell.
Yeah.
So what's going on that he's saying the things that he's saying? And what is he actually telling them to obey, right? It isn't this sort of the authorities are always right. The authorities are trying to kill us. They're clearly not always right. But he's saying, I think he's saying something like, don't get into conflict unnecessarily. Pay your taxes.
Right.
Make sure your taillights aren't out.
Stay under the radar.
That's actually, I think, what he's actually going for. It isn't let's follow the commands all the time. Right? Anyway, we're way over time, so next week.